Some of the places that end up meaning the most to us are the ones we spend years trying to escape. Lisbon is one of those places for me. For a long time, I was convinced that I wanted nothing to do with Portugal. And yet, here I am, again, having breakfast in a city that somehow keeps finding its way back into my life. And if I'm honest, I'm still trying to understand why. When I was younger, the story felt simple. Portugal wasn't for me. At least, that's what I believed. I didn't connect with the version of it that I knew. The silence, the pressure to fit in, the feeling that everybody seemed to understand rules that had never been explained. I always felt out of step, too direct, too intense, too willing to ask questions that weren't supposed to be asked. And after a while, it became easier to imagine that the problem was the place itself. The thing is, life becomes more complicated when you get older. Distance has a way of doing that. You leave, you build a life somewhere else, you meet different people, you see different ways of living, and suddenly, the stories you've been telling yourself for years don't feel quite as solid anymore. Because maybe I wasn't rejecting Portugal. Maybe I was rejecting what my life felt like when I was there. That's the question I found myself carrying this morning. Not whether Portugal changed, but whether I had. This place used to be a palace. Today, it's a museum. A place where fragments of history are preserved. And walking through these gardens, I found myself thinking about all the things we inherit without choosing. A language, an accent, the food you miss when you are abroad, the expressions you still use without realizing, the little things that stay with you, even when you spend years trying to become somebody else. For years, I thought I had left Portugal behind. But the older I get, the more I notice pieces of it everywhere. Not the things I struggled with, the things I kept. When I was younger, I thought identity worked like a straight line. You choose, you move on, you leave things behind. But it doesn't really work like that. It's more like this labyrinth. You think you've found the exit. Then years later, you realize you're standing in the middle again. Looking at the same question from a completely different angle. Looking back, I don't think I was angry at the country. I think I associated the country with some of the most difficult experiences of my life. Those are not the same thing. When you're young, it's easy for everything to become connected. Home or school becomes the town becomes a country the people around you become your understanding of an entire culture. And it can take years to separate those things. I know what happened. I know how those years felt. I know the loneliness. I know the rejection. And I know the feeling of not fitting in. What has changed is not those experiences. What has changed is the distance from which I look at them. I grew up feeling different. I never seemed to understand certain social rules that everybody else accepted without question. I noticed contradictions. I noticed the gap between what people said and what people did. And once I noticed those things, I struggled to ignore them. Sometimes I felt that asking questions created more problems than answers, especially when those questions made other people uncomfortable. For a long time, I thought that if I put enough distance between myself and those ears, they would stop mattering. So I left, first mentally, then physically. And like many people who grow up feeling out of place, I convinced myself that the answer was somewhere else. Another city, another country, another version of myself. And to some extent, I was right. Leaving gave me something important. Perspective. Not because it changed what happened, but because it allowed me to see other possibilities. Other ways of living, other ways of belonging, and other ways of being accepted. And in many ways, that's what Lisbon became for me. Not Portugal as a whole, not even a solution. Just a place where I could start looking at certain things without immediately feeling overwhelmed by them. A place where curiosity became easier than defensiveness. Where I could explore parts of my roots without feeling trapped by them. One of the surprises of getting older is discovering that identity isn't a choice between accepting everything or rejecting everything. Life isn't that tidy. There are things from my upbringing that I still struggle with. Things I still don't understand. Things I may fully never make peace with. But there are also things I value. Things I recognize in myself. The love of conversation. The appreciation for beauty. The creativity. The emotional depth. The feeling that the meal can last 3 hours because the company matters more than the food. Those things are part of me too. Whether I noticed them when I was younger or not. And perhaps that's what this trip has been making me think about. Not whether Portugal was good or bad. Not whether I belonged or didn't belong. But whether I've spent too many years treating identity like an all-or-nothing decision. Because maybe it isn't. Maybe it's something you keep revisiting. Something you keep negotiating. Something that changes as you change.